And we're live. Hello, 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 my friends. Thank you for joining me. I'm Nicholas W. Fuller, and this is Person Behind the Pages, the show where we get to know the people that make the things we love. I'm joined today by Livia J Elliot. How you doing, Livia?
All good. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Let me go click this button over here. So we're going to be live on Instagram too. All right, so Olivia, you're a woman of many talents. You're doing a few different interesting things, like at least in the bookish space, much less in the rest of the world. But you've got multiple. I would call them interactive narratives. I think you call them stories with choice, right? But
Books with choices. Yeah.
books with choices that you have available as apps. I'm excited to talk about that. I think that's super cool. You've got your own YouTube channel where you're doing different interviews and that sort of thing in some different formats, I think, which is pretty cool. We've got some fans in the audience. Hey, what's up, Gregory? Good
Hi,
to see you
Greg.
again. Oh, Tim
He's
was
going to be on
around.
my podcast, actually.
Nice, nice, nice. Greg is good people. You're gonna have fun talking with him.
Oh,
Uh,
I loved his book.
Nice, good, good. Yeah, I wanted like I love your format of your talks too. So, and of course, I know that also you
Thanks.
kind of hinted at Twitter that you've got some other work coming up that's going to be not with choices. So I want to hear a little bit more
Yes.
about that. But please go ahead and like for anyone that's not familiar with you, obviously I've kind of said a few things, but go ahead and introduce yourself, please, Livia.
Yeah, thank you everyone for having me. I'm Livia. As Nick said, I write interactive fiction. I have been writing since I was 7 years old with appropriate quality, mind you, back in that time. And I had serials online when I was a teen.
Oh,
I
cool.
published them, I think, for like 6 years, but I was writing in Spanish. And nowadays I'm writing through the app Unearth the Stories, book with choices, and they are only sci-fi and fantasy. I'm also having my podcast, which is actually a podcast. You can find it in Audible everywhere and also on YouTube. And
Mhm.
that podcast basically has three formats. One is solo episodes in which I do deep dives into the themes of the stories and whatever. So I pick quotes and things that I read throughout it and connect them and make a story or analyze a particular theme within the book. Then I do group chats. Sometimes we do the same with a group of people, or we may discuss a meta theme, for
Mhm.
example, something bigger around books. And I also do deep dives with the authors in which I assail them by questions about the themes and parallelisms between the characters and so on. And as Nick said as well, I'm hoping to publish an actual book this year. I have a few non-published, so I'm slowly going through the backlog and adding new ones as well. So very happy for being here.
So, well, yeah, thank you for being here. Clearly, you just have no problem filling your free time, right? That's
No,
amazing,
I'm
though.
sure. Free time? What is that?
What is this free time? Yeah, no, I get right. That's awesome. Okay. So many different things. I think let's start with talking about your podcast actually. Um
Yeah.
so tell me first like I think the podcast is fairly new. Is that right?
Yeah, I started it, if I recall, October last year.
Okay.
And for October, November, December, I was doing only a single episode per
Mhm.
month, mostly because, I was very new. I wasn't sure if I really wanted it. I just wanted to slowly dip my feet in the water. And after that, I just started loving it. So
Nice. Good.
that's what I added the extra two series, the spotlight with the authors and the group talks with other people.
I do feel like it's such a nice way to kind of connect with other people all over the world, right? And I mean, well, heck, we're
Yeah.
connecting right now from different sides of the planet, right? Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. And sometimes, I get to ask questions to the authors that otherwise I wouldn't have. Like, for example, in some of my interviews, we went very in depth across 5 books because it was about the whole series of the author. And I was just picking up things of, did this relate to that? And so on. And those things sometimes on Twitter you can't, or they are just spoilery and so on.
mhm,
And
mhm.
it's very nice for me to see what the author was intending or what they achieved, sometimes unintended because they are not everybody is a plotter. So I think that gives or to me at least, that brings stories live
Yeah.
up to the forefront, because stories are multi-layered. They are just not the story that we read. They probably have a lot more, and I love to pick on that.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah. It's nice to be able to dive in and hear from the person that made it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you started in October. What like made you want to start the podcasting? And Bo says poor Livia has to be up
yeah,
the wee hours of
Bo,
the day. Yes.
it's 5:30 a.m. I woke up 4:40.
Well,
So
we
why the
appreciate it.
podcast?
Thank you.
Just thank you. So for the podcast, I generally tend to read, and I take so many notes. Like I literally have a notebook, and I take notes while I write, and I have like post-its, and I will put up post-its there. And I generally tend to read the stories in a way that is very deep. And I was poor, my partner. I was just reading and commenting and everything. And one day we went on for like 2 hours ahead on a single book that we shared, Patrick Rothfuss. And after that, my partner says, like, you should do a podcast or something to discuss the books. Okay. So I didn't have, I was like, okay, not sure what to do. And I went in and just shared the idea with a booktuber that has been very supportive, Varsha, from Reading by the Rainy Mountain. And she was a pure enabler, God, get it. This is the microphone you need to get. This is the software that you can use. And she was already giving me everything. And I told that again to a booktuber, an author I'm friends with, Susan Imaginary, and she was like the same, go do it. At the end of the day, I just, and she told me actually, I'm going to give you a reason to do it, and invited me to do a discussion on my favorite book ever, which is Fahrenheit 451. So since I was rereading it, I said like, okay, I'm going to do the first episode, and that is how it started. And then, it's just the way I like to discuss stories, the way for the solo episodes. So I really, really enjoy it.
That's lovely. Sounds like you have some good friends there. I love like friends that give you the peer pressure towards things that are positive in your life. Those are the best, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ones that enable you. You need more books.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right.
If you say so, I'm going to bring more books. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The Rothfuss book that you mentioned, Rothfuss is definitely one of my favorite authors. I'm assuming it was probably Narrow Road Between Desires that you had the big discussion about.
No, actually, it was about the depiction of poverty on The Name of the Wind, on the first one. I think it's great what he did on that one, that he captured the key feelings of it. So we were discussing the whole Tarbian section, especially because my partner, when he read it originally, he read it on a translation in Spanish. Mm-hmm. And many authors, when translated, they don't sound like the author originally wrote it. Like, for example, Tolkien is one. Like, when I read Tolkien in English, I first read the translation. I was just like, that's weird. And in Rothfuss in particular, at least in the Spanish translation, you miss out a lot of clues because he plays a lot with the words. And I read him for the first time in English, and I picked up, some references to some crossed names that could be clues for something that's coming, that in Spanish they are completely lost, So I think I may do a podcast about that whole idea,
That would be cool. You should, not to get on the tangent here, but I've spoken with a couple other authors too that like Gregory Contaxis. Have you heard of him before?
No, I haven't spoken to him.
He's Greek, and he writes initially in Greek, but then he has his work. Well, he has it published in Greece in Greek, but then he has it translated into English. I mean, his English is great, but he's like, nah, I want to have a translator, But yeah, it's very interesting to me the way like that process happens. And
so I have there is an indie series that I actually love, but it is written only in Spanish. And when I spoke with the authors, there are two ladies, and they told me they got it translated to English, and that it didn't sound like them. you know.
Mm-hmm,
That
mm-hmm.
is what they told me. Like they didn't sound like them. That it wasn't. So yeah, I think that there is a lot of lost meaning. I'm not sure if I will translate my own writing.
Yeah, I was.
That's
Well,
interesting.
that brings up a really interesting question. I believe that you're bilingual. What language do you, when you're doing your initial drafting, what language do you draft initially?
English. I do everything in English. So yeah, I'm bilingual. I speak Spanish. I'm
Mm-hmm.
South American, so from Argentina. That means that at home I speak a weird mixture called Spanglish because one language is not enough.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I just write everything in English. I stopped writing in Spanish when I was, I think, 19 or 20 when I was at uni.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I used it as a way of learning as well, learning the language back then.
Sure.
And yeah, after that, I think both languages are gorgeous, but you can do very different things in one than in another, you know?
One of the things
Um,
that I find like fascinating too, in language, as language and word nerd as I think we all are, is just like the way that different languages and different like handle different topics. Like in
yeah,
American English, they're like the bomb is a good thing, or you killed it means a good thing, and there's so much of that really aggressive tones, you know. Whereas in Spanish, there's multiple different words for love, or like Eskimos have a bunch of different words for ice, but or we
yeah,
in the English all over the world, there used to be so many different words for horses, like mare or stallion or whatever. Now there's tons of different words for car, like sport utility vehicle or SUV or coupe or roadster, like all these different things, and they're so
yeah.
like kind of embedded and we rarely think about them, but they really kind of say a lot about what's important in a culture, right?
Yeah, I think that at least in Argentina, if you consider the slang, we have so many words for friends. And
Oh,
it's so
nice.
important that we actually have a national holiday for friendship,
I did
really.
I did not
In
know that,
July,
and that is
we have
lovely.
a national holiday for which is Friends Day. We have it in
Yeah.
July, and friends will just gather and do group things, and you have
That's
all
so
the
great.
promotions and the advertisement. Everything goes into the friends, so we have a lot of words for that.
We need more of that in the world, man. That's fantastic. Can you
Yeah.
tell me some of the slang words for friends? I would love to hear some of that.
So amigo, that's the
Of course.
basic one.
Of course.
Friends. Compinche, that one is basically the person you share details, that you can go and do mischief together. And
Yes,
right,
yes.
we don't have much of something similar to acquaintance. Acquaintance.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
It's not really. You have translations for colleagues, colega, but you don't have anything, for example, for the Australian mate.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
Right? And there are others that have, they can be something like an insult or they can be something very nice depending in the context. So sometimes
Sure.
it's difficult to grasp.
Right.
Yeah.
I like compinche. I'm gonna try to adopt that with at least one of my buds. That's a good one.
Yeah. The funny thing about that one is, yeah, for example, for Mexican people, they may misunderstand it because
Oh,
we are
really?
part of, yeah. So we have some words like that, like the
Right?
baseball cup. It has a
Uh-huh.
one name in, I think, in Venezuela that it means something very different in Argentina, like completely different. So yeah,
That's
it's variance and slang at the end of the day.
I love that about language. And then I'm also like sometimes I nerd out about etymology too and like how words come about and
Yeah.
interesting stuff. Very cool. So you when you've been writing for a long time. I think you mentioned doing fan fiction when you were very young, which is super cool. Um,
I
when did
was
you?
doing actually, I was actually writing web serials. Some
Oh
of them,
yeah.
I think I never wrote much fan fiction. I think only
Okay. Okay.
once or twice, but then I just wrote weird stories and fantasy things.
That's cool. Did you post them on like your own blog or on like a Tumblr?
Yeah,
Where'd you
I had a blog and I posted them every week. Every weekend I will have one
put
chapter out, and I think I went on for like 5 or 6 years.
Wow. Do you have
Yeah.
a total word count on how much that was after all this time?
No, I have no idea.
I would be
I
curious.
know that some of them were like 50 or 60 chapters, and I had to do, 2 chapters per week just to speed it up. I'm not sure if I will do serials again right now,
Yeah.
mostly because I don't think I can keep up between writing the
Right.
books and the books with choices. It tends to be a lot.
Yeah. Well, as we spoke about in the beginning, what's free time, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I hear you. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I feel like serials are kind of having a little bit of a resurgence with certain sites. I don't know if you've ever heard of Royal Road and how popular like Lit RPG is on that website, but
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I have
yeah.
heard of it. And you have the series that Wraithmark did,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the Mother of Learning, right? That was,
Yes. Yes. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, I think they were originally on that Royal Road website, but then
Mm.
and they've sort of blazed this path with you start on Royal Road and then you get to Patreon and then you kind of release on Kindle, especially with Kindle Unlimited, and you're just sort of building an audience at each step. It's interesting. I'm going to talk next week with someone that's sort of pursuing that path, so I'm excited for that one too. But that's
Oh, exciting.
right. Neat that you were doing the serials. So what got you into doing these stories with choices now? Like, what
Oh, well,
was there a moment where you're like, I want to do this, or did you experience some other stories that were similar that really inspired you?
so I have been a gamer my whole life. Like, uh, I started playing Shining Forces in the 90s on the set.
Nice.
And that's big
Yeah.
lead RPG and stories and everything. And I went on playing, and my partner and I we played a lot of games together as well. And in 2020, I tried to go the traditional route, mostly because I didn't know anything about indie publishing. The classical fears. I was too scared. I didn't know how to do this, that, and so
Mm-hmm.
on. And I didn't have much luck, but I think that the worst was having some very nasty comments from the
Mm,
agents, and I tend, if you read Dance with Me or any of those, I tend to write a lot about mental health or topics that are a bit dark, even if
mhm.
I have a positive outlook. And I got, some not very nice comments about that. So I wasn't sure what to do with how to move forward with those books. And I was still a bit scared about publishing regular books, indie style, and so on. My partner is a video game developer. So he came in, Prince Charming style, and he told me, do you want, I'm going to make a game for you, and you can write anything you want there. So
Nice.
that's why the game Unearth the Stories is us in the acronym. So
Yeah.
he's a main developer. We went in through finding how we could actually make the interactivity and what we wanted to do in there and what type of books we wanted to bring in. So it was a bit of a couple months of researching how we will do that. And yeah, that's how basically, because he proposed.
Yeah. He was
So, and he also works a bit as a developmental editor, and for example, for testing and editing these stories in particular, it's very different because it's both a mixture of developmental editing and alpha testing and
Mm,
testing the gameplay and the mechanics. So it's more, I will say, two flavored, right? Because you have to play or check different stuff. So, and after that, I started reading, or more that reading about indie publishing,
mhm.
and college got the fear away. So now I'm going to be publishing in June.
Woohoo! Nice. That's super cool to hear. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you've got the you've got the podcasts going that are available on YouTube and as a podcast. You've got your interactive narratives, and you're about to have a book come out. What a busy year for you in a fantastic and wonderful way. That's awesome.
Yeah, honestly, we started last year with the apps with the
Hmm.
Unearthed Stories, and it got released on June last year, but it was only on Android, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And we got used of Black Friday. We got a whole Mac setup and so on, and started developing there and porting the game. That is why it came this year later on iOS and iPhone.
Nice. So,
Mm.
are the games, are they, is it all on one app or is each story on a different app?
No, it's all in one app, so I can show you if you want, and
I
that's
would love
the
to see that
advantage.
and talk about like different features that you were like if what you mentioned the alpha testing and kind of you look at different features. I want to hear. Tell me all the things.
Oh, you have no idea how difficult it is to test every single path in a story, because then you get a scramble. Like, did that happen in this path that I'm reading, or in the previous path, or did you change it? It's very difficult. So let me share a bit on the window. This one?
That's exciting.
Not sure. Yeah.
There we go. And the stage.
This is basically how it starts, and you get we call this a bookshelf. So every cover, once you tap it, you get this screen. And in this screen, you can have, for example, you have the tags in white, the gender, and you have the warnings if you want. In this case, you have a description, and in some cases like this one, you have a content warning that if you tap it, you get a spoiler description of what it may contain. And this one in particular is quite long. You have a lot of chapters, and then on the artwork, you get all the artwork that you unlock, because it's like illustrations in a book, But the difference is that you may encounter it or not, depending the path that you go. So, for example, in Mean, you will always unlock the map, but there is one of them that is like a chart of a magic system that you may or may not unlock it, depending on the path that you go and what you read. Or the characters that you meet. For example, in Dance With Me, you have portraits of the characters, and if you don't meet the character, you don't get a portrait, right? So, and we have also some of the blurs in there in the app. So this is basically for the navigation. This is exactly for Dance. So Dance has a lot of artwork, and this one in particular, the artwork is a Mexican artist, and he did it on graphite. So he then scanned it, and we put it up in the app. We want to bring more, traditional artwork into the game.
Super cool.
Yeah. So let me see if I can share another one, which is actually the gameplay. For the gameplay is more like a traditional Kindle. We actually try to get a lot of how is it called? We try to get a lot of styling from that. Like, you actually can put up the dark, white, and sepia modes of Kindle, something similar. And we did so much, such a lengthy analysis on the font because we wanted, this is mostly text-based. So we wanted something that will be readable for dyslexic people, right?
Sure. Okay, nice.
And we wanted something that will cover a lot of characters as well, like special characters. So this is the gameplay. In this particular case, we are looking at Mean, and you get styles like this, like the frame. In Mean, you get a frame whenever you are in a flashback. So that's why it looks whole. Or you may get frames if, I don't know, you are in a dark place, you may get a narrowing flame. You get transitions like this. Let me see if I can find another. In this one in particular, there is a moment in which the character uses like a magic, and everything flashes golden, and you get the gold flash. But basically, it's always the same. You get a few paragraphs, and then you get choices. You swipe the choices, and that's the one that goes on. And then for the page change, you get an arrow. Sometimes there are weird things, like Mean, for example, has 2 specific modes. Like, you get the purple one that I call Revenge, and you will see that the choices are sometimes more aggressive. And the green one that I call Faker, and it's a bit more introspective, perhaps. And the more that you take those choices, the more the story diverts. And from chapter 10, in Mean in particular, it splits completely. And you get 2 very different endings with different alternatives, each of them. And spoiler alert, if you want to hear the whole story, you need to read both. On Restorers, for example, Restorer has 6 endings. And that's because it was shorter, so I could actually try. It's only 4 chapters. So, and it doesn't have the modes, right? So it depends on different stories how we did it. Let me show you one. So yeah, sometimes you have to scroll up a lot. Sometimes you get the artwork very quickly. Sometimes you don't. Let me share one about Restorers, because that one has something. Restorers is the only sci-fi that we have so far.
It's really cool. It's neat to
Yeah.
see. I haven't I've only done like a couple interactive fiction or stories with choice like this, but the experiences that I've had have been so cool. So definitely need
Yeah,
to see
so
more.
let me share Restorer. Okay, so in Restorers you get this, because my background is software, and you are playing as I'm a software developer, and you play as a robot. I actually use like some pseudo language to
Yeah.
get the actions, so the actions are actually programming, right? And that's why they are written that way in the command line. And when they get messages, they are written in that style, console like. So
Mm-hmm.
it reads the message there, and because it goes into the network, you get a different frame. And yeah, so on this one there is a lot. Yeah, you get a message like this. So it gives room for that stuff as well.
That's so cool.
In this one in particular is it has some tricks, because the whole idea of Restorers is to discuss knowledge as an enabler of choice. So at the start, the robot is very constrained by the framework it has, by the rules it has. So sometimes you will get weird choices like you can only accept. So you get acknowledge, accept, avow, and then they are the same aliases, and then the character says something like, oh, this is just an alias or something. But the more if you choose to actually pursue knowledge or investigate or things like that, you get more and more and more choices until you can defy the choices and you can completely disagree, because you have enough information to make a logical inference, right? Because it's a robot. And in the opposite way, if you keep avoiding the pursuit of knowledge, the character starts losing itself. So it goes from speaking as I do this, I depart, I go,
Mm-hmm.
and start speaking in passive voice. That's one different ending, right? So this one in particular has
Wow.
6 endings. It was
That's so
shorter.
cool.
Yeah, it was shorter, so it was easier to do more, more
Yeah, yeah.
endings.
Right.
In the ones that are, the longer the story is, the more difficult it is to get to add variability. The scope creep is exponential. That's, yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. So 2 questions. One, you mentioned like features. So what is the experience like as you're kind of, I mean, obviously you're reading through and you're kind of clicking to the next page and then you're making a choice, but are there other abilities of the phone that you're sort of taking advantage of? For example, there was one that I read in interactive fiction where you would make a choice and then the story would stop for hours and then you'd get a push notification and the story would be like, this is the outcome of that choice. But during those hours, I'm
Yeah.
stressing out, like, did I just kill the main character? Like, so are there any things like that you've sort of taken advantage of? And then, like, what is your process like when you're trying to map out all these branching options that the reader can take?
Yeah, okay, so let's go with the first one. In terms of features, besides the ones that are UI only, like
Mm-hmm.
changing the font size and fixing stuff and so on, I try to actually use the choice as a mean to tell the story,
Mm-hmm.
right? So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, there is one part in which a character says to another, you have so many questions, ask them, and then you get literally 20 choices, and
Oh,
you
wow.
type them, and you cite them, and the list is like 20 choices. And after that, it's like you put, yeah, I remember that my partner, when he read that for the first time, he told me like, this was stressing. And I was like, that's a point, because you have so many choices that you can choose and the character can choose, right? And oh, hi Paramita. And the whole point is that even the character is feeling that distress and being
Mm-hmm.
swarmed with question, that now the reader is feeling it by having all the choices, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I will also revert the choice that the reader makes. Dance with Me is a story about emotional abuse, and sometimes the main character, she's not in the right state of mind. So you will see a lot of workaholic or questions or choices that will just endure them that state in which she is. And when you take a choice, then she scratches the text and does something different, because that's what happens when you have depression. Sometimes you just can't do anything different because the anxiety and the distress that trying to do something different brings is just too much, you know? So I'm trying to use the choices in a way that I can safely immerse the reader, right? So choosing in this, at least in my writing, is just not go there, say this. Sometimes there is so much more to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, sometimes you get the multiple questions, or you get choices that are rewarding sort of the same thing, and so on. And yeah, that's, and for example, in one of the new ones, I have 2 more coming on the 15 for the United States. So in one of those are weird because I added 2 narrators. The ones that are currently published, they are all in first person. And in that one in particular, one narrator goes ahead and will say something like, the main character goes left. And then you actually get the choice to go right or go left, right? So because there is a whole idea of you don't have to live by the predefined narrative, right? You can make your own choices. But if you agree with a quote-unquote narrator, then the narrator will be happy, right? They will follow on, and that's fine. But the more you disobey, the more the narrator goes off a script, right? And there is a whole thing. Yeah, oh, Paramita, yeah, I read Borges, The Forking Path. I read it in Spanish. And I will imagine it is possible. Like the one in particular that is more similar is Cortázar's Hopscotch, that many people may have read it, which is a book in which you basically can read from any chapter. That's the whole point.
Oh, wow.
From any chapter, you get different stories, right? And the point is how you traverse the story, like the path that you go from beginning to end, right? And there is one of the upcoming ones, Means of Egress, that roughly has an idea. It has 182 different ways of going from beginning to end. And I went nuts writing it. And the idea is that
That's
the path
amazing.
is unique. Yeah, it was. I had to do some tricks, to keep the scope manageable. And it was very difficult. Yeah. So yeah, in general, what I try to do is add with the choices to make an idea. And for example, in the fact that you have a green and a purple one, it may somehow bias the reader or player to just pick one color, right? And just stick to that character of picking one color. And in reality, sometimes you as a reader may be more keen on taking something different, right? Or doing a mix match and so on.
You mentioned that you're like a big video gamer too. I think that yes, you've played the Mass Effect games, so that makes me think of like the Renegade and Paragon system that they had.
Yeah, actually, that inspired me.
Yeah, I was
I
about to
felt
ask
like,
if that. Yeah,
I have 400 hours on Mass Effect. I
nice.
can't play something different than Paragon. There are 2 choices that I actually always do Renegade style because I just hate the characters and they deserve what the Renegade does to them. But generally, it's just not. I always start a gameplay saying like, I'm going to play Renegade. I'm going to play Renegade Paragon.
Yeah, better. Yeah. I'm the same way.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Smart. Pick up your book. Yeah.
There are actually 2 stories coming in, and they are both themed around escaping. So that's why the update is called Elusive Pathway. So you have one that is figurative escaping, escaping from someone's past, and that is Reflections. And the other is escaping from a dungeon. So it's physical escaping. But the dungeon is an allegory for something else.
That's exciting. That sounds really fun. Paramita has an interesting question.
Rashuela, yeah, that's Hopscotch from Cortázar. On psychological implications, in addition to purely cerebral thoughts experiment, yeah, it's a conscious choice. I think that's also how I read or why I read. People read for different things. I generally started reading when I was a kid because I wanted to learn from the books. I wanted the books to give me something else. And when I read a book, I generally try to think about the themes that it may be bringing up, what the author wanted to say, or how that relates to me, you know. For example, the novella from Joshua Walker, The Rest to the Gods, I really like the implications between both characters. And to me, it was so significant between the past person and the present narrator, you know. Don't want to spoil anything. And that's how I read. So when I write, I do the same, right? To me, it's not an idea of, I want to, in this case, I want to use a Paragon and the Renee. That didn't come first. What came first for me was in particular the whole theme that I'm complaining about, which is not revealed through the story, and you need to read the author notes to find out, because everything throughout the story is actually an allegory, even the structure of it. Like what happens in the chapters is part of a bigger allegory that I'm not going to tell you because it will just spoil everything, you know. But
Sure.
The themes for me come first, and I think that the books with choices are very powerful to explore things in a way that sometimes in regular books, you can't, because they are different mediums, you know, and different mediums are good for different things. Like a movie or a game with visuals may be able to give you an experience that a book will not give you, and the book may give you an experience that the movie can't. For example, A Space Odyssey, reading the book and watching the movie, they are two completely different experiences, and that's because each of them leverages their medium, right? So, yeah, I think that the idea of having the reader as a co-author or with some input in the story, it actually changes the immersion. And I generally tend to use choices more than as a choice, you know. It means you can literally choose whether to kill or spare a character, or to kill one or another. There is a part in which I don't give you a choice. It's either kill this one or kill this one, right? One or the other, and that's it. And that, depending on how which one you choose, you may actually start thinking why you choose that one and not the other, right? Or if you prioritize a mission, or if you prioritized someone's lives, right? And sometimes, even if the story goes, you may not get the answer of what happened immediately, right? Some choices build up, some choices are immediate, and sometimes you will get, as for example, a character may not cooperate because you killed another, and they found out, right?
Yeah.
So,
that's really cool.
yeah.
I love kind of all that you're putting into that. That's really, really interesting. Obviously, we've mentioned like a couple times that you're going to have a book coming out. Are you still planning to continue writing more of these books with choices in the future?
Yeah, definitely. So we have these two new ones coming up now, and I'm hoping that I can make an October release of new stories on the app, but I'm not sure. It will depend on. I have at least 5 plotted out. So it's just a matter of sitting and writing. I'm an extreme plotter. I cannot write without a plot. So I have them plotted out. Some are sci-fi, some are fantasy. So the only thing on whether or not I get them out this year as well is time.
Yeah, right.
You know? Yeah.
What did I asked someone I interviewed a little while ago, like what their their dream is for all their creative work, or like what their dream scenario is, and they were like, I don't know, more hours in the day to do everything that I want to do, you know.
Yeah.
I hear it. So that's really cool. What when you're thinking about this interactive fiction, and like yours especially, but more broadly to kind of all interactive fiction that's out there, are there any, I mean, it's driven by technology, of course, like yours are phone apps, right? And I think that's a very natural place to put it. But thinking about like something like maybe Apple Vision Pro or that sort of thing, or any sort of different technology, are there some things that you think about, like, man, that would be really cool to be able to do someday, like, but I just haven't been able to do it yet? Are there different like kind of applications of the technology, different features that you like, that you think maybe other developers too might take advantage of in the future?
Not sure for other developers and so on. At least what we want to bring is, that Apple has the embedded narrators that you can use for your apps. So we want to use those systems so that we can reach, because this is a text-based app And we want a natural reader just to make sure that we actually can reach people that don't have a perfect vision or that may want to
Sure.
have an aid for that. So that's something, but we still need to work on that. It's not that easy. And in terms of new features, we wanted to do, for example, animated text, because sometimes
Yeah.
if you get animated text, at least in a bit, it can give you something different, a different feeling, right? And
Right.
it goes on that idea of leveraging the medium of what we can do here that we can't do in a book, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's one of the things that's really neat about it is, trying to leverage the medium. Like that one of the,
Yeah.
I mentioned it has the push notifications that I thought really added to that particular story.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this. I don't know if you can hear my family. Apologies if they're hearing, but yeah, like the same sort of idea. It would be neat if like there was I'd love to do an interactive narrative at some point, and I'm just kind of
Yeah.
trying to think of like how could I take advantage, but it would be fun to kind of add an element where the story said like, okay, like I want you to help me find a clue or that sort of thing, but like it sort of put it, with like location, you could track and see if they're moving, and you say like it's 2 blocks, to the east or whatever, and you have to get the
Yeah.
reader to actually move some, almost adding like an augmented reality element to it. I think.
So we consider doing that, for example, for restorers. But the
Uh-huh.
problem is that it's not a problem, it's a reality. We have so many apps, so many things being tracked, that when you publish on Google Play or in the App Store, you need to make a very thorough disclosure of everything that you are using, right? Every type of information. And if the app wants access to the
Right.
camera or to send vibrations, you need to put it up. And it's actually a deterrent for users because, or readers, whatever, people install an app and you may ask, why does a reading app want to use my camera, right? And that actually gets you fewer installs, right? So we
That makes
had
sense.
to move out from some features like those, mostly because we wanted to make sure that we get a public, that we get a name for the app, and that we
Yeah.
show that it's actually safe, right? I did do different stuff on the upcoming I went wild on the upcoming update. So for reflections, you can only read it once. Once you reach the end, the story will remember that you read it and it will change. So it
Wow.
will change once. It doesn't matter how many times you reread it. It already changed. And the text is applied differently. And again, that's deliberate because that story is about emotion and language. So once you read it once, especially if you read the author notes, but you get the idea, you understand the problems from the protagonist. The other day I put up a little reading about it, and it's about one character talking to you, the reader, because he's talking in second person about escaping, all the times he escaped. So the more you find out the problems, and you can't erase the knowledge, right? So when you go back, you have the language to actually discuss the things that were troubling him. So that's why the story changes. On the second one, on Means of Egress, which I put up as a dungeon crawler, but it's very philosophical, it breaks the fourth wall, right? So that story, the fourth wall is basically the division between the real life and the fictional world. And in that, I wrote a whole thing on my website, on my own blog about that one. It's not that much about the characters implying that they are fictional, because that's not the thing, but they imply that there is something more. It reaches a point in which, depending on your choices and depending where you go, the narrator, which is not the same as the main character, this one also has one, they can expel you. They will literally expel you out from the game, and they will get a pop-up, and it can you can go home and it gives you the icon, or you can keep reading. And it's all part of the story because it's part of what that story is the point the story is trying to make, right? And the comparison that it's doing. And you also get this idea of, you get the narrator, which is the dungeon master. I'm sorry, Greg, I know you are a nice guy. It's not about you. It's not about dungeon master, but this one is very mean. The one in the game, and yeah. So he gets that dungeon master. They get very annoyed if you don't follow the prescription. right? And so you get, sometimes when you read the Dungeon Master, you can read, the Dungeon Master says something, they cannot hear the thoughts of the main player. The main player cannot hear the Dungeon Master, right? So what happens is that you as a reader, you actually see both texts. So you get the narration of the Dungeon Master, you get the narration of a player. And sometimes the player may be inspecting something that looks weird, and the Dungeon Master tells you, this is a trap. I prepared a trap here. And you can take the choice as a reader, but are you taking the choice with your knowledge that is actually more than the knowledge that the main character has? Or are you just role-playing and going there because it looks safe, even though the Dungeon Master is telling you it's not safe and it is a trap? Right? So that also breaks the fourth wall, because it's, are you using the privileged information or not to make your choices, right? And
Yeah.
that's part of the, again, it's part of the allegory of that story, which is a bit more about life. The dungeon is life, right?
Love that. So interesting.
Mhm.
And I think you're the only writer I've ever heard of that like tried to kick people out of their story, you know?
Yeah. My partner was like, that's not a sensible choice when you want to retain people. Like, I'm
No,
a
I think
writer,
that's good.
I'm creative.
I think that's really
Yeah,
interesting. That's really cool. Well, I'm
thank
excited to
you.
check them out. I'm excited to check out your novella also. It sounds like you've got so many cool things coming. Very, very cool. It's been
Thank
nice
you.
chatting with you. Where can people find and follow you online, Livia?
Oh, so they can find me almost everywhere as Livia J Elliot. I'm on Twitter, on Threads, on Instagram, and also on YouTube as Livia J Elliot. And my podcast is called Books and Done, and you can find it in YouTube, but also almost any other platform for podcasts, from Audible to Spotify, Apple, iTunes, everywhere. And yep, my website is Livia J Elliot if you want to read some of that blog post that I mentioned as well. So,
Nice.
and the app is called Unearthed Stories, and it's both in Android through Google Play, which is your app store, and in iPhone and iPad through the App Store as well. And it's free. So the app is free. Most of the stories are free. So
Oh, wow.
go read them. Yeah.
Go get some free stories. What are you waiting for? Right? Nice. That's super
Yeah.
cool. Nice. Awesome. Thank you. If you guys want to check me out, follow me. I know some of you are watching on Twitter. You can check out my YouTube channel. It's just Nicholas W. Fuller. You can also go to my website, nicholaswfuller.com, and then find my free Patreon there. That's where my newsletter is. I just treat my Patreon right now like a newsletter. So, yeah. Thank you all for watching. Thank you again for being here, Livia. I appreciate it. It's been a fun
Thank you
chat.
so much for inviting me. It was amazing.
Absolutely. No, my pleasure. And if no one's told you it today, you're an absolute legend.